Picture this, if you will. It's a morning 30,000 years before Christ, and the world is a frozen wasteland that would make Siberia look like a tropical vacation. The air is so cold it burns your lungs, and the ground beneath your feet is harder than concrete. In this unforgiving landscape, where one mistake means death, and two mistakes mean your entire bloodline ends with you, a small figure stands apart from the greatest hunters humanity has ever known. His name is Krog, and right now, he's watching something that would become as pivotal to human civilization as the discovery of fire or the invention of the wheel. He just doesn't know it yet. Krog stands barely 5 feet tall, and in a world where size literally means survival, that's a death sentence. His left foot, twisted and scarred from a childhood wolf attack, drags slightly as he moves, while his brothers Gron, the spear thrower, and Brak the swift practice their bone-rattling war cries, preparing to chase down creatures that weigh as much as a modern pickup truck. Krog does something different, something that would have gotten him laughed out of any respectable hunting party. He watches. He thinks. He observes how ice forms natural pits that trap unwary animals, how spiders wait with infinite patience for prey to stumble into their webs, how the great saber-toothed cats use terrain and timing rather than just brute force to bring down mammoth calves. Now, let me paint you a picture of what these hunts were like. Imagine 15 to 20 men, each one a physical specimen that would make today's NFL linebackers look like accountants, charging across frozen ground after animals that stood 12 feet high and weighed 8 tons. These weren't weekend hunting trips. They were military campaigns against living, breathing siege engines, equipped with tusks longer than telephone poles and tempers that made grizzly bears seem cuddly. The mortality rate? Let's just say that reaching 30 was considered a remarkable achievement, and most hunting parties came back with fewer members than they started with. But on this particular morning, as frost crystals dance in the pale sunlight, and the tribe prepares for yet another potentially suicidal charge against the mammoth herds, something extraordinary is about to happen. The tribal council is gathering, and for the first time in his life, Krog has decided to speak. The fire crackles in the center of the meeting circle as the greatest hunters of the tribe take their places. Grak sits in the position of honor, 7 feet of muscle and scars, carrying his legendary spear, Bone Piercer, a weapon that has killed more mammoths than disease and old age combined. His presence alone is intimidating enough to make grown men reconsider their life choices. Beside him sits the shaman Yaga, whose necklace of cave bear claws rattles ominously with each movement. Her weathered face has seen 40 winters, an age so advanced it's practically mythical, and her words carry the weight of divine authority. When Yaga speaks, people listen. When she doesn't approve of something, people tend to disappear into the wilderness and never return. And then there's Krog, limping forward with an armload of what looks like children's toys. Clay models, river stones, carefully shaped pieces of wood, the kind of crafts that 8-year-olds might make during a boring afternoon, not the tools of a serious presentation to the most dangerous men in the known world. What happens next would echo through 30 millennia of human history. Using his clay models and stones, Krog begins to demonstrate something that has never been attempted before. He shows how a concealed pit, carefully disguised and strategically placed, could trap animals without requiring hunters to risk their lives in direct confrontation. He explains how wooden spikes, angled just so, would prevent escape. Most revolutionary of all, he demonstrates a weighted log mechanism that would be triggered by the prey's own movement, turning the animal's size and strength against itself. The silence that follows is deafening. You could hear an ice crystal hit the ground, and then Grak begins to laugh. It starts as a chuckle, deep in his massive chest, but quickly builds into the kind of laughter that brings tears to your eyes and makes your sides ache. Soon the entire council is roaring with amusement. Here is this twisted little man, barely half the size of a real hunter, suggesting that they hide in holes like frightened rabbits instead of facing their prey with honor and courage. "This is how we hunt," Grak declares, rising to his full, intimidating height and raising Bone Piercer above his head. The spear seems to glow in the firelight, its tip stained with the blood of countless victories. With courage, not cowardice. with strength, not tricks. And then, with casual brutality that speaks volumes about how the strong treat the weak in this frozen world, Grak brings his heel down on Krog's carefully crafted models. Clay shatters, wood splinters. Months of patient work are destroyed in a single contemptuous gesture. But Grak isn't finished. Perhaps, he suggests with mock consideration, little Krog should learn to weave baskets with the women, since he clearly lacks the stomach for real hunting. The laughter that follows is cruel and absolute. Even worse, Krog notices, is the silence from those who might have supported him. Nera, the chief's daughter, whose gentle smile had once given him hope that maybe, just maybe, intelligence could win over strength, even she turns away, her face flushed with embarrassment. Only one person in the entire gathering watches with something other than scorn or pity. An 8-year-old boy named Tok, whose young mind hasn't yet learned that thinking differently is something to be ashamed of. His dark eyes follow every movement as Krog gathers his few possessions, and theirs. Something there, curiosity perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. The shaming ritual that follows is as old as the tribe itself. Yaga steps forward, her bear claw necklace clicking like bones in a funeral shroud. She mixes ash with mammoth blood, creating a paste that she uses to paint symbols of emptiness on Krog's forehead while chanting words that exile him from the hunting grounds forever. As Krog limps toward the borderlands where outcasts go to die, carrying nothing but his crude tools and his revolutionary ideas, none of them realize they've just witnessed the birth of human civilization. Because sometimes, the most important moments in history happen when the crowd is laughing at exactly the wrong person. 3 moons pass in the borderlands, and if you think modern survival shows are tough, imagine trying to stay alive in a world where literally everything wants to kill you. No shelter except what you can build with your bare hands. No food except what you can catch or gather. And winter temperatures that would make Antarctica seem balmy. Most exiles die within days. The smart ones die within hours. It's more merciful that way. But Krog is about to become something unprecedented in human history, the first engineer. While his former tribe continues their traditional hunts, losing 2 more hunters to a particularly aggressive mammoth they've nicknamed Skull Crusher, Krog is conducting what we might recognize today as systematic research and development. His laboratory is the wilderness itself, and his test subjects are anything unlucky enough to wander into his experimental zone. His first success comes with a rabbit. Now, I know what you're thinking, a rabbit? Really? After all that build-up about revolutionary hunting techniques, we're talking about catching something the size of a house cat. But here's the thing about revolutionary moments. They rarely look revolutionary when they're happening. The Wright brothers first. Flight lasted 12 seconds and covered less distance than a modern jumbo jet is long. Yet it changed everything. This rabbit represents something that has never existed before in the 300,000-year history of our species. Proof that intelligence can systematically triumph over instinct. Krog doesn't just catch the rabbit and move on. He documents everything. Using notched marks on birch bark, humanity's first technical documentation, he records depths that work best, which bait attracts specific animals, how weather affects trap efficiency, seasonal variations in animal behavior. He's creating what we would recognize today as an engineering database, building knowledge systematically rather than relying on trial and error. The breakthrough that changes everything comes when Krog realizes something profound about animal behavior. Creatures, no matter how large or dangerous, are creatures of habit. They follow the same paths to water sources, use the same routes, through difficult terrain, return to the same feeding grounds with predictable regularity. Instead of randomly placing traps and hoping for the best, he begins positioning them along these natural highways where animals must travel. The results are staggering. Within weeks, his success rate multiplies exponentially. He's catching animals daily that would require dozens of hunters and considerable risk using traditional methods. And he's doing it alone, with a twisted foot, using nothing but cleverness and careful observation. But the real test comes when winter's grip tightens and something emerges from the deep caves that sends every tribe within 100 miles fleeing in terror. The cave bear that the hunters have named Shadow Death, a monster standing 8 feet tall on its hind legs, equipped with claws longer than daggers and a temperament that makes rabid wolves seem friendly. This creature has killed 12 hunters over the past 3 winters, including Brock the Mighty, who was considered the second strongest warrior in the region. When Krog returns to his former tribe, dragging something behind him that stops every conversation and makes hardened warriors take involuntary steps backward, he's not carrying a dead cave bear. He's pulling a living, breathing nightmare secured in an ingenious wooden cage. The same council that had mocked him into exile now watches in stunned, almost religious silence, as this limping outcast demonstrates exactly how his trap captured the monster that had haunted their nightmares. The cage itself is a marvel of primitive engineering, flexible enough to absorb the bear's thrashing without breaking, secure enough to contain 800 pounds of furious predator, yet light enough to transport. Using young Tok as his assistant, the boy who had watched with fascination rather than scorn during his exile, Krog explains the mechanics with the patience of a master teacher. The bear's own weight triggered the mechanism. The pit's angled walls, designed after careful study of natural funnel formations, made escape impossible. The cage could be lowered using lever principles that multiply human strength by factors these people had never imagined. What follows is as inevitable as sunrise. Grak, his authority threatened and his worldview crumbling, issues the traditional challenge: single combat to determine who deserves the title of Master Hunter. In this frozen world where might makes right, disputes are settled with spear and muscle, not words and ideas. The entire tribe gathers in the combat circle, expecting to watch the inevitable, the quick, brutal destruction of the clever little cripple who had somehow gotten lucky with a bear trap. Grak stands 7 feet tall, wielding Bone Piercer with casual confidence. His scars tell the story of 100 victories against man and beast alike. This should be over in seconds. But Krog has anticipated this moment. Hidden beneath a thin layer of snow and carefully disguised vegetation lies a demonstration trap not designed to kill, but to prove a point that will echo through millennia. As Grak charges with Bone Piercer raised high, confident in his overwhelming physical superiority, Krog does something that no warrior in tribal memory has ever attempted. He runs away, but it's not retreat, it's choreography. Krog leads Grak in a carefully calculated dance around the combat circle, limping and stumbling in apparent desperation while actually positioning his opponent with surgical precision. The crowd jeers, shouting encouragement to Grak and insults at the cowardly exile. And then Grak's foot finds the trigger. The pit is shallow, perhaps 3 feet deep, but the symbolism is infinite. The greatest warrior of the tribe, the man who has killed more mammoths than any hunter in living memory, thrashes helplessly in muddy water while the entire community watches their established order collapse in real time. The silence that follows is profound. When Grak finally climbs out of the pit, covered in mud and stripped of his mystique, he doesn't challenge Krog again. Instead, he does something unprecedented. He asks to learn. That night, as they feast on cave bear meat, the first time many of them have tasted such a delicacy, Krog shares his knowledge freely. He teaches trap construction to anyone willing to learn, but particularly to those the traditional hunting system has failed. Elderly hunters whose strength has faded but whose experience remains valuable, women seeking to contribute beyond gathering and child-rearing, young people who see opportunity in new approaches rather than threats to tradition. For the first time in human history, a society is systematically choosing brains over brawn, and the reverberations of that choice are about to reshape civilization itself. Because when you change how humans think about strength versus intelligence, you don't just change hunting techniques, you change everything. Word spreads across the frozen steppes faster than wildfire, and in a world without writing, without roads, without any communication system more sophisticated than smoke signals, that's saying something. Within 5 winters, a time span that would seem glacial by our standards, but represents lightning speed in the prehistoric world. Tribes from the Carpathian Mountains to the Siberian plains are sending representatives on journeys that take months, risking death by exposure, predation, and starvation, all to learn from a man they now call Trap Father. Think about that for a moment. These are people who have never travelled more than a few days from their birthplace, suddenly undertaking expeditions across thousands of miles of the most hostile terrain on Earth. It's the prehistoric equivalent of NASA missions, except the stakes are even higher because failure means extinction for entire bloodlines. Krog, now recognized as the master of this revolutionary hunting method, has established something unprecedented: humanity's first technological training center. But he's not working alone anymore. His most brilliant student, young Tok, now grown into a man whose innovations often surprise even his teacher, has developed portable traps that can be carried during tribal migrations. These lightweight yet effective devices transform nomadic hunting from a desperate scramble for survival into a systematic harvesting operation. Meanwhile, Neera, who has become not just Krog's wife but his wisest advisor, creates something that will prove even more revolutionary than the traps themselves: a system of symbols to record trap designs. Using charcoal on cave walls and etchings on mammoth ivory, she's developing humanity's first technical drawings. These aren't crude stick figures or mystical cave paintings. They're precise engineering diagrams that allow complex knowledge to be preserved and transmitted across generations. We're witnessing the birth of institutional learning. For the first time in human history, knowledge doesn't die with the person who possesses it. But revolution, as any student of history knows, never comes without violent opposition. Change threatens those whose power depends on the old ways, and in the prehistoric world, that opposition can be literally deadly. Enter the Bloodspear Alliance, 5 tribes led by warriors who view trap building as spiritual corruption, a cowardly abandonment of the heroic traditions that separate men from beasts. Their leader, Gorak the Red, whose nickname comes from his practice of painting his entire body with the blood of his kills, declares war on what he calls the coward's way. Gorak represents everything the old world valued. He stands 8 feet tall, wields a spear carved from the tusk of a mammoth he killed single-handedly, and has never retreated from any fight. His alliance includes over 200 warriors, each one a legendary hunter in his own right. Against them stand perhaps 50 trap builders, many of them former outcasts, elderly hunters, and young experimenters. By every traditional measure, this should be a massacre. The conflict culminates at the Battle of Broken Tusks, fought in a valley where mammoth bones from countless hunts have created a natural amphitheater. Gorak's strategy is straightforward and terrifying: a massive frontal assault that will crush the trap builders through overwhelming force and restore the natural order where strength rules supreme. What he doesn't realize is that Krog and his followers have spent months turning the entire valley into something that has never existed before in warfare: a systematic killing field. As the Bloodspear Alliance charges down the valley walls, confident in their superior numbers and traditional tactics, they encounter something beyond their comprehension. Hidden pits, carefully disguised, swallow warriors whole. Swinging log traps, triggered by tripwires, sweep fighters off their feet with bone-crushing force. Coordinated tactics, developed through careful study of animal pack behavior, channel the attackers into predetermined kill zones where they can be eliminated methodically. It's not just a battle, it's the collision between 2 fundamentally different ways of thinking about conflict. Traditional warfare, based on individual heroism and brute force, meets systematic strategy for the first time in human history. The turning point comes when Gorak himself, leading from the front as heroes must, falls into a mammoth-sized pit designed specifically for large prey. As he thrashes helplessly in the carefully constructed trap, his invincible mystique dies with him. The sight of their legendary leader reduced to flailing helplessness breaks the spirit of the Bloodspear Alliance more effectively than any weapon could. With Gorak's death, the old ways don't just lose a battle, they lose their spiritual authority. Survivors of the Alliance return to their tribes carrying stories of impossible defeats and revolutionary tactics. Within a generation, traditional hunting begins to seem not heroic, but foolishly wasteful. The victory transforms trap-building society in ways even Krog hadn't anticipated. Reliable food sources from systematic trapping allow permanent winter camps humanity's first step toward settled civilization. Specialists emerge as the complexity of trap systems requires dedicated expertise. Trap engineers who design new mechanisms, bait masters who understand animal psychology, pit architects who can read terrain like a book. Most revolutionary of all, the first trading networks develop as tribes begin exchanging trap designs for furs, tools, and exotic materials from distant regions. Knowledge itself becomes currency, creating economic relationships between communities that had previously known only warfare or isolation. To manage this explosion of innovation, Krog establishes the Council of Builders, where improvements are shared and developed collectively rather than hoarded by individuals. It's humanity's first scientific institution, dedicated to the systematic advancement of knowledge for the benefit of all. But success, as Krog is about to discover, creates its own dangerous enemies. Among his students, resentment begins to grow. Drac the Ambitious, a brilliant innovator whose improvements to trigger mechanisms have saved countless lives, begins to claim credit for developments that built upon Krog's foundational work. He argues that he deserves recognition as co-founder of the movement, pointing to specific innovations that were indeed his own creation. The philosophical split that follows will sound familiar to anyone who has studied the history of technological revolutions. Should knowledge be shared freely for the common good, as Krog believes, or should innovators receive exclusive credit and compensation for their discoveries, as Drac argues? It's a question that will reappear throughout human history, from ancient guilds to modern patent disputes. The conflict comes to a head during a demonstration of Krog's masterwork, a trap system so sophisticated it can capture an entire mammoth herd simultaneously, using coordinated mechanisms spread across miles of terrain. The engineering required is breathtaking. Precisely timed triggers, multiple backup systems, escape routes for operators, and redundant safety measures to prevent accidental activation. As the demonstration begins, with tribal leaders from across the known world gathered to witness this pinnacle of prehistoric engineering, something goes catastrophically wrong. The massive log that serves as the primary crushing mechanism swings wide of its target. The carefully calibrated pit covers collapse prematurely, and the entire system becomes a chaos of splintering wood and panicked mammoths. In the confusion, Krog simply vanishes. Some say the mechanism failed due to sabotage by Drac's faction. Others believe it was simply the inevitable result of attempting something too complex for the available technology. A few whisper that Krog deliberately disappeared, recognizing that his revolutionary ideas had grown beyond what any single person could control. Only his tools remain, along with drawings of devices so advanced that no one can decipher them, blueprints for mechanisms that won't be reinvented for thousands of years. The mystery of Krog's disappearance will haunt human civilization, but his legacy is already written in the changed world he leaves behind. In valleys across the frozen continent, humans are living differently, thinking differently, organizing their societies around intelligence rather than strength. And somewhere in those icy winds, the future is taking shape. Krog's disappearance sparks immediate and predictable chaos. Like the death of Alexander the Great or the collapse of any revolutionary movement built around a single charismatic leader, his followers immediately fragment into competing factions, each claiming to represent the true spirit of his teachings. Tok, now greying at the temples and bearing the wisdom of decades spent perfecting trap-building techniques, leads those who honor the original philosophy of sharing knowledge freely. His faction, calling themselves the Open Hand, continues to teach anyone willing to learn, regardless of tribal affiliation or social status. They see trap building not as a trade secret to be hoarded, but as humanity's common heritage. Meanwhile, Drac the Ambitious and his supporters take the opposite approach. Calling themselves the Closed Fist, they begin demanding payment for teaching, establishing the first prehistoric guild system, where advanced techniques are trade secrets available only to paying apprentices. They argue that innovation requires incentives, that people value what they pay for more than what they receive freely. Now, you might expect this philosophical split to slow down technological progress. After all, how can you advance when half your innovators are keeping secrets from the other half? But here's where human nature reveals one of its most fascinating contradictions. Competition often accelerates innovation faster than cooperation. Both factions, driven by the need to prove their approach superior, begin pushing trap-building technology in directions that would have seemed impossible just generations earlier. The open hand develops mass production techniques, creating standardized components that allow rapid construction of basic trap systems. The closed fist pursues sophistication, crafting mechanisms so intricate and effective that a single master can achieve what previously required entire hunting parties. Within 10 generations, a time span that sounds enormous until you realize it's only about 250 years, trap-building principles have evolved into something we would recognize as primitive engineering. The same understanding of leverage, weight distribution, and mechanical advantage that captures mammoths is being applied to move massive stones for monument construction and build defensive walls around permanent settlements. But the truly profound transformation isn't technological, it's cultural. For 300,000 years of human existence, strength had determined leadership. The biggest, most aggressive, most physically intimidating individuals ruled their communities through the simple principle that might makes right. This wasn't just political structure, it was the foundation of human social organization. Krog's revolution changes everything. Communities that adopt trap-building techniques begin valuing intelligence and creativity over pure physical prowess. Leadership positions start going to people who can solve problems rather than dominate opponents. The shift happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, but it's irreversible. Consider the mathematics alone. Traditional hunting requires young, strong males willing to risk death for uncertain rewards. The mortality rate is staggering, perhaps 50% of hunters die before their 30th birthday. This means that knowledge, experience, and wisdom constantly die with their bearers, forcing each generation to relearn basic survival skills. Trap building changes the equation completely. Reduced male mortality rates mean that knowledge accumulates across generations instead of disappearing. Women and elderly members gain economic importance as trap maintenance requires patience and fine motor skills more than raw strength. Children learn mathematics through trap geometry, developing cognitive abilities that previous generations never needed. Most importantly, the focus shifts from individual heroism to systematic thinking. Instead of celebrating the warrior who single-handedly kills a cave bear, communities begin honoring the engineer who designs systems that make cave bear hunting safe and reliable. The archaeological evidence for this transformation is scattered across Eurasia, like breadcrumbs from a giant's feast. Excavation sites from France to Siberia reveal standardized trap designs, spreading along ancient migration routes, proof of humanity's first systematic technology transfer. The designs are too similar across two great distances to represent independent invention. This is deliberate knowledge sharing on a continental scale. Even more fascinating are the cave paintings. From Lascaux to the Ural Mountains, prehistoric art begins featuring a recurring figure. A small man with a twisted foot standing triumphant over enormous beasts. Different cultures transform this figure into their own mythological heroes, but the core story remains remarkably consistent across thousands of miles and hundreds of generations. The Greeks will tell of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, a clear metaphor for someone who democratized powerful knowledge previously held by an elite few. Norse mythology gives us Loki, the clever trickster who survives through cunning rather than strength, often using traps and deception to defeat physically superior opponents. Native American traditions speak of Spider Grandmother, who taught humans to weave webs and snares, turning the hunter into the hunted. Each culture adapts the story to its own needs and values, but they're all telling variations of the same fundamental tale. The triumph of intelligence over brute force, the moment when humanity learned to think its way out of problems instead of fighting its way through them. The most remarkable discovery comes in 1994, when excavations in Slovenia uncover a 30,000-year-old trap system that matches exactly the design principles described in cave art from the same period. The finding vindicates what anthropologists had long suspected but couldn't prove, that one innovative individual's response to mockery had, indeed, changed human destiny. The trap itself is a marvel of prehistoric engineering. Wooden components preserved in bog conditions reveal sophisticated joinery techniques, precisely calculated weight distributions, and backup safety mechanisms that demonstrate systematic thinking about failure modes. This isn't crude trial-and-error craftsmanship, it's evidence of someone who understood mechanical principles at a theoretical level. Carbon dating places the site at approximately 30,000 years before Christ, exactly matching the time frame suggested by the mythological traditions. More tellingly, the surrounding area shows evidence of permanent settlement, food storage systems, and craft specialization, all innovations that traditional hunting societies never developed because they never had reliable enough food sources to support non-hunting activities. Today, 8 billion humans live in cities, feed themselves through technology rather than personal strength, and survive by solving problems rather than winning fights. Every smartphone, every skyscraper, every medical device, every transportation system, all of it traces back to that frozen morning when a limping outcast refused to accept that muscle must rule mind. We are all Krog's children, inheritors of a worldview that says intelligence can triumph over any obstacle, that systematic thinking can solve any problem, that cooperation and knowledge sharing create possibilities no individual could achieve alone. Modern civilization, with all its complexity and sophistication, is simply the logical extension of principles first demonstrated in mammoth hunting traps. But perhaps the most profound legacy isn't technological or cultural, it's psychological. Somewhere in our collective human memory, we carry the story of the moment when the weak became strong, when the mocked became the teacher, when thinking differently stopped being a liability and became humanity's greatest asset. That story echoes every time an underdog succeeds through innovation rather than force, every time knowledge defeats ignorance, every time someone changes the world by refusing to accept that things must always be done the way they've always been done. 30,000 years ago, in the shadows of creatures that could crush a human being without effort, one small man with a twisted foot looked at the world differently. He saw solutions where others saw only problems, opportunities where others saw only obstacles, potential where others saw only limitations. In that moment of defiant creativity, civilization was born, and in the frozen valleys of prehistory, where Krog's name has been lost to time but his influence shaped every human society that followed, the future took its first tentative steps toward the world we inhabit today. The echoes of his revolution still ring in every human achievement, every technological breakthrough, every moment when intelligence triumphs over ignorance. We may not remember his name, but we live in the world he made possible, a world where thinking differently isn't just accepted, but celebrated as the very essence of what makes us human.